Chapter 1. Feudal Manorialism, Stasis by Design. Imagine an economy where almost all capital is land, most labor is bound to that land, and the rules of production are customs you inherit, not contracts you choose. That's manorialism. A lord holds legal title, peasants work narrow strips in open fields and owe labor days on the demesne, rents in kind and banal fees every choke point, the mill, the oven, the bridge, the market. Innovation is possible, but the person who pays for it seldom keeps the gain. At the core is a broken incentive. Producers are not secure residual claimants. If a serf drains a marsh, rotates crops cleverly, or buys a better plough, the lord can raise dues or capture the surplus under the cover of custom. Tenure is insecure. Exit requires permission and payment. Mobility is a punishable offence. Rational peasants do enough to survive lean years and meet obligations, not enough to gamble on improvement that others can skim. The open field layout amplifies the drag. Strips are scattered across the village. Counters are set collectively. That spreads risk when tools and power are scarce, but later it blocks reconfiguration that higher productivity needs. Fencing, drainage, crop specialization, staggered sowing. Commons protect the poor in bad harvests, but also invite overgrazing and vetoes on change. Even when a neighbor tests a new seed mix or tool, coordinated timing and shared rights dilute the benefit and discourage diffusion. Markets are deliberately fragmented. Villages and towns use different weights and measures. Internal tolls cut roads into tax segments. Staple rights force merchants to unload and sell locally before moving on. Add the banalities, mandatory use of the lord's mill and oven at monopoly prices, and transaction costs soar. Credit exists, but courts are weak, interest is stigmatized, and collateral is bound up in personal status. With little enforceable finance, investment tilts toward short-run extraction rather than long-run productivity. Shocks reveal the structure. After the Black Death, labor becomes scarce. A market system would let wages rise and people move. Manorial law tries to freeze both. In parts of Western Europe, enforcement falters. Labor services commute into cash rents, and enclosures, however harsh, concentrate decision rights so someone can invest, rotate, and fence. In much of Central and Eastern Europe, elites tighten obligations into a second serfdom, pushing grain exports while locking workers down. Same plague, opposite institutional choice, divergent centuries. Manorialism isn't pure darkness. Watermills spread, the horse collar and heavy plough open new soils, three-field rotations raise yields. But adoption is slow and lumpy, because every improvement must pass through fragmented property, collective calendars, and status law. Where towns win charters that standardize measures, protect contracts, and let capital pool, trade deepens and learning curves finally appear. Where guilds and local authorities convert quality rules into entry barriers, the rural trap reappears in urban dress. Why the system fails long run. 1. No secure surplus for the producer. Without stable, alienable rights to land and product, risk-taking remains small and local. 2. Blocked reconfiguration. Strips and collective governance prevent layout changes that unlock scale and specialization. 3. Engineered market balkanization. Tolls, staples, and variable standards keep markets shallow so know-how doesn't compound. 4. Predatory fiscal capacity. Revenues depend on proximity and power, not broad, predictable taxation. Investment flees discretion. The secular exit is legal and fiscal. Replace status with general rules, convert dues to money rents, unify measures, and tear down private tolls so a state can tax broadly and lightly rather than narrowly and harshly. Enclosures, when paired with poor relief and openings in towns, shift rights from custom to contract and make improvement credible. Where courts become cheap and reliable, and where the person who risks labor and capital can count on keeping most of the marginal gain, the flywheel of productivity finally turns. Modern rhyme, informal plots without title, roadblocks and fees at every jurisdiction line, licensing cartels that guard incumbents. These are manorial mechanics without castles. The same test applies now as then. Does the improver keep the surplus by right or only until a custom cousin or captain notices? If it's the latter, you've built stasis by design. And stasis fails not because it can't feed a village, but because it can't build a future. Chapter 2. Mercantilism, bullion without bread. Picture a minister in a paneled room counting ingots while customs officers seal bales at the dock. The program is simple. hoard gold and silver, make exports outrun imports, grant exclusive charters to national champions, police luxuries, subsidize strategic manufactures, and treat trade as a zero-sum race. If the vault swells and the ledger shows surplus, the nation is rich, or so the theory runs. Its central mistake is to confuse means with ends. Bullion settles foreign debts and pays armies. It is not food, shelter, or machinery. Real wealth is productive capacity, skills, tools, organization, and the institutions that let firms learn and scale. A state can stuff its treasury while its people grow poorer if protected producers face no pressure to raise productivity. Charter monopolies and tariff walls feel like strength but operate like cushions. Rents replace rivalry. Talent migrates from invention to license hunting. The failure is also microeconomic. When entry is blocked and prices are set from above, firms compete in courtrooms instead of workshops. Quality rules morph into barriers. Import bans become excuses to sell worse goods dear. Subsidies glue capital into pet sectors long after world demand has moved on. And because the game is framed as us versus them, every purchase from abroad looks like betrayal rather than a chance to specialize, learn, and move up the value chain. History's case studies are blunt. Spain rides rivers of American silver into the 16th century price revolution. For a time, debts are paid and fleets sail. But bullion inflows lift prices faster than productivity, crowd out manufacturing, and strengthen a currency that makes Spanish goods uncompetitive, a pre-modern Dutch disease. When the mind's slow, the bills don't. Easy money, delayed hard reforms. Colbert's France offers the polished version. Tariffs uniform, royal manufactures labelled and inspected, roads and canals pushed forward, a navy built. Some factories improved standards, infrastructure stuck. Yet the larger pattern remained. Micromanagement and chartered privilege fostered rent-seeking, provincial tolls fractured the home market, and fiscal hunger from near-continuous war devoured surpluses. The state proved good at picking favourites, less good at creating a field where many could try and the best would win. England looks mercantilist on paper, navigation acts, colonial preferences, but an institutional twist mattered. Alongside protection, it built deep capital markets, standardized measures, courts strangers could trust, relatively open company formation, and bankruptcy law that let losers exit. Domestic rivalry stayed fierce, patents were temporary, charters were fewer and more contestable. The same export push thus sat atop a competitive engine, which is why Britain grew out of its walls. The walls did not grow Britain. The idea also ignores basic adjustment. Hume's specie flow logic tells you that persistent surpluses raise domestic prices, imports become attractive, exports slip, and the surplus shrinks unless you throttle trade by force. That solution is costly, policing smuggling, subsidizing ships, and waging wars to defend privileges abroad drain the very treasuries mercantilists celebrate. Colonial practice made the contradictions stark. Exclusive chartered companies pooled capital and risk for long voyages, a real coordination feat, but fused state power with private rent. Captive markets sheltered inefficiency. Extraction outranked local productivity, corruption and smuggling flourished. The temporary glow of monopoly profits masked a deeper problem. No learning curve, no competitive discipline, no resilience when fashion or technology changed. Defenders say protection can incubate infant industries. Sometimes, yes, if protection is narrow, time-limited, paired with brutal domestic rivalry and conditioned on export performance. Mercantilism's error was to make the incubator the model. Infants became pensioners. When the wall replaces the workshop as the source of profits, firms perfect the art of lobbying and forget the art of making. The durable lessons are not anti-state, they're anti-confusion. A capable state funds public goods, infrastructure, education, standards, honest statistics, enforces open entry and competition, and taxes broadly and predictably. Tariffs and subsidies, when used, get sunset dates tied to measurable productivity, not political anniversaries. Capital markets that finance many bets beat ministries that anoint one. And trade is not trench warfare. It is a feedback system that reveals what you're good at and where you lag. Modern echoes are easy to spot. Forced local content with no timeline to world-class quality. State champions shielded from rivals. Currency games that flatter exporters while dulling pressure to improve. Export credits that outlast their rationale. These moves buy time. They also buy complacency. If managers spend more hours meeting quota targets than cutting costs and redesigning products, the scoreboard will eventually tell the truth, even if the surplus line still flatters. Keep the simplest test in mind. If a policy raises productivity under rivalry, it builds wealth. If it raises rents under shelter, it props up a balance sheet while the pantry empties. Mercantilism chose the ledger over the workshop. The prosperity that lasted chose the reverse. Chapter 3. Guild Cartels and Crown Monopolies. Innovation on a Leash. Guilds began as problem solvers, teach apprentices, certify quality, pool risk, keep reputations intact in a world with thin courts. Over time, many hardened into cartels. Entry was rationed, prices were posted, tools and techniques could be banned as unfair, geography was carved into exclusive zones, lawsuits and confiscations met anyone producing outside the charter. Crowns discovered a revenue stream. Sell monopolies on salt, soap, tobacco, printing, or overseas trade, enforce them with fines and force, book the fees. The economics is simple. Innovation spreads through entry and experiment. Cartels throttle both. If a cheaper loom appears, it is illicit. If a dye or alloy improves quality, it is unapproved. If rural cottage producers undercut town prices, they are illegal manufacturers. Quality rules drift into barriers to entry. Training becomes rationed access. Public order becomes private protection. In place of rivalry, you get rent extraction, small markets, and slow diffusion of know-how. Case studies sharpen the picture. In pre-revolutionary France, thousands of guilds fenced off crafts. Entire sectors, printed cottons, were throttled until the Le Chapelier Law, 1791, dissolved corporations of trades altogether. The Calico Acts in England tried to shield wool by banning popular Indian cotton prints. Consumers smuggled, producers lobbied, and mechanization bulldozed the wool anyway, once spinning and weaving costs collapsed. The Bubble Act, 1720, restricted joint stock formation, slowing organizational innovation just when large, pooled capital could have sped canals and factories. Chartered trading companies like the East India Company did real feats, long-distance finance, logistics, insurance, but their monopoly status fused state power with private rent, breeding governance failures and crowding out competitive entrants. Guild defenders have fair points. Certification reduces buyer risk, apprenticeship preserves complex skills, self-policing substitutes a weak state capacity. That is the baby worth keeping. The bathwater is exclusivity in permanence. When the same body that tests quality also controls who may produce, standards become levers for cartel pricing. When monopoly charters never expire, sunk political investments beat sunk capital investments every time. Talent migrates from the workshop to the courtroom. Profits come from letters patent, not better processes. A second failure is scale. Cartels protect incumbent firm sizes and the status hierarchy inside crafts. But new techniques often demand larger, riskier configurations. Factory floors, steam power, standardized parts, professional managers. Where entries are capped and corporate forms are scarce or costly, firms stay small and local. Big learning curves never start. That is why places that liberalized incorporation and limited liability early pulled ahead. They made it cheap to try big. Third, cartels distort information. Prices that should signal scarcity or demand get administratively set. Just prices float above market clearing levels. Quotas tell you what the guild wants, not what buyers value. In that fog, it's hard for entrepreneurs to discover what works, harder still to finance it. Lenders know that tomorrow's success can be litigated away, so they fund insiders, not ideas. What replaces the leash without losing trust? 4 moves recur where innovation flourishes. 1. Separate certification from entry. Let independent bodies test quality and safety. Let anyone who passes produce. 2. Sunset exclusivities. Patents and concessions get clear terms, narrow scope, strict novelty tests and firm expiries. 3. Open corporate forms. Make it cheap to found, audit and wind down companies. Reserve harsh scrutiny for firms with systemic risk. 4. Keep antitrust sharp. Prevent collusion and predatory tying, especially on platforms that can become private navigation acts. Modern echoes are obvious. Occupational licenses that outgrow safety into scarcity. Professional bodies that set fees and restrict seats. Standards processes captured by incumbents. Zoning and permitting that function as quiet local monopolies. App stores and ad networks writing rules that privilege their own products. The symptoms are medieval. Fewer entrants, higher prices, slower diffusion, more lawyering. Guilds and chutters were a rational response to thin states. They become economic failure modes when they survive their usefulness. The goal is not no rules. It is rules that keep trust while keeping doors open. Innovation needs friction at the point of harm, not at the point of entry. Put a leash on abuse, not on ideas. Chapter 4, the classical gold standard, beautiful theory, brutal adjustments. From the 1870s to 1914, with a troubled sequel in the 1920s, major economies tied their currencies to gold at fixed parities. The promise was elegance. One money for the world, anchored prices, and near frictionless capital flows. Central banks followed the rules of the game. If gold flowed out, deficit, raise interest rates, contract credit, let wages and prices fall. If gold flowed in, surplus, ease policy, often less enthusiastically, let prices rise. Hume's price-specie flow mechanism would restore balance. Dear countries export less and import more. Cheap countries do the reverse. No devaluations, no money printing, just automatic adjustment through prices. The beauty hides a deflationary bias. External balance is achieved by making internal conditions bear the load. In a deficit, rates go up, credit tightens, investment stalls, unemployment rises, wages must fall to restore competitiveness. Prices are sticky, contracts are nominal, debts don't shrink when incomes do. The system works if labor markets are flexible, unions weak, migration open, safety nets thin, and central banks willing to tolerate pain. In late Victorian Europe, elites could deliver that. As mass politics rose, consent for automatic austerity fell. Two other weaknesses compounded the strain. First, the gold standard is pro-cyclical. Booms attracted gold and encouraged credit. Busts drove gold out and forced contraction exactly when support was needed. Lenders of last resort could in principle offset that, but gold rules and thin reserves constrained action. In practice, easing in a panic risked a run on your reserves and the parity itself. Second, the system relied on credible commitment. If markets suspected a devaluation, they could attack preemptively. Defending parity then required even harsher tightening. The more democratic the polity, the harder it was to promise that jobs and wages would be sacrificed to a metal peg. The interwar gold exchange standard magnified fragility. War debts, reparations, and uneven recoveries distorted flows. Parities were restored at politically chosen, often overvalued rates. The US and France sterilized gold inflows rather than recycle them, starving the rest of liquidity. When shocks hit 1929 to 33, gold rules turned a bad downturn into the Great Depression. Countries that left gold earlier, devaluing and reflating, recovered faster. Those that clung longest suffered longest. The lesson was not subtle. Advocates point to benefits, long-run price stability, anchored expectations, deep capital markets, and a disciplining device against fiscal excess. All are real, under very specific conditions. Price stability averaged across decades hides violent short-run swings. Anchors help, but only if the chain doesn't drown you when storms come. Capital mobility without banking backstops transmits crises faster. Fiscal discipline that forbids counter-cyclical action can turn a recession into regime change. What does failure mean here? Not that gold never delivered calm, but that its operating requirements, labor flexibility, elite insulation from democratic pressure, symmetric adjustment by surplus countries, ample reserves, central banks willing to lend freely in panics, are rarely met together. In their absence, the mechanism enforces adjustment on the weakest joints. Debtors, workers, and periphery states. The 19th century's success rested on social and political arrangements that modern electorates will not, and arguably should not, accept. The durable lessons translate cleanly. Don't adopt hard pegs without buffers, large reserves, fiscal capacity, deposit insurance, and a true lender of last resort. Make adjustments symmetric. Surplus countries must expand when deficit countries contract, otherwise the burden is one-sided and politically unsustainable. Choose a nominal anchor that can bend. Credibility matters, but so does state contingency, rules that allow targeted flexibility in crises. If you want a common money zone, build the institutions that make it safe. Banking union, fiscal transfers, and mechanisms that spread shocks instead of amplifying them. Gold carried an appealing story. Money as metal, politics out of the loop, virtue rewarded. In practice, it outsourced policy to a commodity and punished the very responsiveness modern economies need. The tragedy is not that the theory lacked logic, but that its logic demanded social costs few societies can durably bear. An anchor is vital. An anchor that drowns you is not. Chapter 5. War Communism, 1918 to 1921. Requisition, rebellion, collapse. Civil war. Russia tried to run an economy like a besieged barracks. Private trade was outlawed, factories were nationalized en masse, food was requisitioned directly from peasants, the продразверстка. Money disintegrated into hyperinflation and then irrelevance. Rationing, compulsion, and the secret police filled the gaps where prices and contracts had been. The intention was survival, and for some, a leap to socialism by abolishing the market at a stroke. The result was a textbook on how to erase incentives, information, and legitimacy all at once. Start with agriculture. Peasants would sell grain only if they could exchange it for useful goods at tolerable prices. But factories, disrupted by war and hurried nationalization, couldn't deliver tools, cloth, or salt. With relative prices forbidden to adjust, peasants rationally withheld surplus, shifted to subsistence crops, and hid what they could. The state responded by escalating force. Detachments seized grain at set quotas, regardless of local harvests or peasant needs. Output fell, black markets flourished, the army and cities starved anyway. Political backlash followed: Tambov's peasant uprising, strikes in Petrograd, and the Kronstadt revolt of sailors who had been early regime supporters. Industry fared no better. Central decrees gave managers impossible targets without inputs. Workers drifted, were conscripted, or left for the countryside. Maintenance was deferred. Spare parts vanished. With prices meaningless and profits illegal, the signals that tell firms what and how much to make were replaced by orders based on fragmentary reports. Administrators bargained upward for inputs and downward for obligations. The state printed money to feed its payroll. The ruble slid into worthlessness. Barter took over. By 1921, industrial output had collapsed to a fraction of pre-war levels. Cities emptied. A devastating famine swept the Volga. These aren't just too much violence stories, they're coordination and calculation failures. Abolishing markets removed: 1. Incentives to produce beyond quotas, 2. Information about scarcity and demand, and 3. Discipline, budget constraints and bankruptcy, that forces resources toward value. The state tried to substitute administrative knowledge for millions of decentralized choices under conditions of war, epidemic, and transport breakdown. No bureaucracy can know local yields, changing weather, seed stocks, or peasant risk in real time, and coercion scales badly when compliance requires creativity rather than obedience. Enforcement costs mounted. To keep food flowing, the regime had to police villages, roads, depots, and factories, punish speculators, monitor workers, and staff layers of committees. Each layer created niches for evasion and rent-seeking. The more the state squeezed, the more production slipped to the shadow economy, exactly the system's moral enemy. By 1921, the leadership conceded reality. War communism was replaced by the new economic policy: legalizing small trade, taxing grain instead of seizing it, restoring profit to guide enterprise, and stabilizing money. Durable lessons: 1. In a supply shock, criminalizing exchange destroys output. You need incentives, not edicts. 2. Taxation beats confiscation. A predictable share of a larger harvest yields more grain than seizing a fixed quota from a shrinking one. 3. Money must hold value or planning becomes shouting. Stabilize the budget and currency early. Even under emergency command, use prices and procurement contracts to aggregate local knowledge. Targets without trades are wishes. 5. Don't mistake repression for capacity. A state that can seize a barn can't thereby repair a lathe or invent a plowshare. War communism demonstrates a hard boundary. You can temporarily mobilize by force. You cannot coordinate a complex economy that way. The NEP pivot wasn't a betrayal of survival. It was the admission that survival requires exchange. Chapter 6. Soviet-style central planning. The shortage economy after NEP came the long experiment. Abolish markets for the commanding heights. Replace profit and price with plans and drive growth through quotas. Gosplan balanced material flows. Steel, coal, cement via material balances, while ministries set output norms, wages, and deliveries. Prices existed administratively, but they didn't decide, they recorded. For a time, mobilization worked. Massive investment shifted labor from farms to factories. Electrification, steel, and armaments surged. Then the system's mechanics caught up with it. Three failures define the shortage economy, Cornai. First, the information problem. Central planners cannot know the quality, timing, and local substitutions needed across millions of items. A shoe plant needs leather, glue, lasts, dyes, spare parts, transport slots, each with its own contingencies. Without market prices that reflect scarcity and preference, planners rely on reports, and reports are gamed. Factories plan bargain, exaggerating needs and downpaying capacity to get easier quotas and bigger input rations. Data flows upward optimistic and downward unrealistic. The center balances books that don't match the world. Second, the incentive problem. Enterprises face soft budget constraints. If they miss targets, ministries bail them out with more inputs or easier norms. Bankruptcy is political, not economic. Exit is rare. Entry by new firms essentially nil. Bonuses tied to gross output. Tons of nails, meters of cloth. So factories hit numbers by making the wrong things. Nails too large, cloth too narrow, shipping unfinished goods on December 31st, or hoarding inputs to survive next year's plan. Quality and variety suffer. Consumer goods lag. Maintenance is cannibalized to meet this quarter's tally. Innovation that risks disruption is avoided. The ratchet effect punishes success by raising next year's target. Third, the allocation problem. Because demand chronically exceeds supply at controlled prices, the economy rations by queue and connection, blat, not by willingness to pay. Households waste time. Firms tie up inputs in buffers, hidden inventories grow, storming at year-end wrecks schedules and machines. Prices, stripped of their coordinating role, can't draw resources into new lines or push obsolete ones out. Even when planners spot a shortage, they can't easily reprice to fix it. A cascade of administered changes would be needed across the whole table. Attempts to fix the machine from within, Kosygin 1965 reforms, profit-like indicators, more autonomy, later perestroika, bumped into the same wall. As long as the state insulates enterprises from failure, officials from competition, and consumers from choice, signals remain muddy and discipline weak. Partial markets create arbitrage. Full markets require political permission to let firms fail, people move, and prices bite. Permissions that threatened the system's power base. Why did early growth happen at all? Because extensive growth, throwing labor and capital at heavy industry, doesn't require fine information or high-powered incentives. Once the easy gains are taken, you need intensive growth, productivity, quality, innovation, services. That requires experimentation, entry-exit, and price-guided discovery, precisely what the plan suppresses. By the 1970s, total factor productivity slowed sharply, queues lengthened, military and space feats coexisted with empty shelves and creaking infrastructure. The model could mobilize and copy. It struggled to learn. The lesson isn't that states can't plan anything. It's that states can't substitute plan for price across a complex economy without building chronic shortages, low quality, and stagnation. Effective mixed models give the state narrow, high-leverage roles, macro stability, basic research, infrastructure, competition policy, while letting decentralized actors discover what to make and how. They enforce hard budgets, allow entry and exit, and use prices that move to transmit local knowledge. Where public ownership persists, it is paired with contestable markets, transparent accounts, and managers paid for value, not volume. If you need one diagnostic, in a healthy system, missing the customer shows up as loss and triggers change. In a shortage economy, missing the customer shows up as a queue and nothing changes. Chapter 7. Maoist Command Experiments. Collective Tragedies. Picture a village canteen in 1958. The pots are bottomless, on paper. Communes promise eating to your fill, work points vanish, and targets leap skyward. Backyard furnaces sprout like mushrooms, school children beat pots to drive sparrows from the sky, grain reports race upward, then upward again. This is the great leap forward, a bet that mass mobilization plus political will can outpace agronomy, metallurgy, and markets. The economic mechanics go the other way. Start with incentives. Communal dining and pooled pay delink effort from reward. Households can't hedge with private plots. Local cadres are judged on output numbers, not on survival rates. When Beijing raises quotas, provinces exaggerate harvests, requisitions then seize grain that never existed. To avoid punishment, villages ship seed grain, tools, even roofing. With no private stores and no price signals to ration scarcity, famine moves from rumor to fact. Add information failure. Central targets ignore soil conditions, weather, seed varieties, and labor constraints. Dense planting and deep plowing come from ideology, not experiments. Yields crash. The Four Pests campaign kills sparrows, crop predators, yes, but also insect eaters, triggering locust booms that policy never modeled. Backyard steel melts tools into brittle slag. Labor leaves the fields during critical windows. Plans count tonnage, not utility. The village that fulfilled its pig iron quota has ruined its harvest. Then discipline misfires. Fear enforces reports, not results. Under terror, cadres pass up bad news and pass down pressure. When rations thin, peasants flee or forage. The state criminalizes grain theft from communal fields. Transport bottlenecks starve some regions, while warehouses elsewhere hold unusable outputs that look like fulfillment on paper. International trade could buffer shocks, but autarkic pride and politics limit imports until late. The mechanism that might correct error, prices that jump, merchants who arbitrage, managers who cut failing lines, has been replaced by slogans and punishments. The Cultural Revolution adds a second wave of economic damage. Schools and factories are purged, technical hierarchies collapse, research and maintenance stall, and political campaigns continually reset priorities. The state tries to substitute ideology for expertise. It gets neither morale nor mastery. Over time, survival pushes back, responsibility systems return de facto, household plots reappear, procurement loosens, and later reforms legalize what worked in the shadows: profit, entry, prices that move. Why these experiments fail as economic systems is not that states shouldn't mobilize or plan, it's that political targets replaced feedback. 4 structural errors recur. 1. Collectivization without residual claimancy. When households can't keep marginal gains, effort and experimentation collapse. 2. Targets without tests. If you only reward numbers that subordinates report, you select for eloquence and fear, not truth and yield. 3. Symbolic substitutes for capital. Backyard furnaces, campaign agronomy, and mass drives are cheap theatre. They destroy real capital, tools, soil, skills. 4. Autarky under shock. Refusing trade raises the amplitude of mistakes. Openness cushions them. The durable lessons are practical, not ideological. Keep household or firm-level stakes in output. Test agronomic claims in randomized trials before scaling. Pay cadres on verifiable welfare metrics, child weight, mortality inventories, not just tonnage. Let prices allocate scarcity and emergencies, supported by targeted relief, and treat trade as safety gear, not as treason. When politics outruns feedback, even sincere mobilization becomes a machine for turning hope into loss. Chapter 8. Fascist Corporatism, Cartels plus Autarky. Now a different promise. No class war, no messy markets, just a unified nation where labor, capital, and state sit in corporations by sector, harmonizing wages, prices, and production under national goals. In practice, fascist corporatism, Italy, variants in Germany, Iberia, and imitators, welded cartelization to autarky and hid the bill with rearmament. Unemployment fell, parades swelled, and statistics glowed, until the constraints bit. Begin with the cartel logic. Sector corporations set minimum prices, output quotas, and wage frameworks. Independent unions are crushed, strikes banned, competition policy neutered. Incumbents gain seats at the table, entry shrinks, scale adjusts by political favor, not market test. Quality and efficiency progress where the state buys standardized goods, arms, rails, but in consumer sectors, variety and innovation stall. Profit comes from placement inside the quota machine, not from beating rivals. Information degrades. Posted prices are not signals but assignments. Quotas hide demand shifts. Costs are padded when buyers are ministries. Layer in autarky. Self-sufficiency goals push synthetic substitutes. Ersatz rubber fuels, homegrown victory crops, and import controls. Some projects spur useful learning. Many lock capital into inferior techniques chosen for political symbolism, not cost. Foreign exchange saved at the dock is burned in factories that can't reach world quality or price. The consumer pays in queues, grey markets, and thin shelves long before official statistics admit it. Then add the bright mask, rearmament. Orders surge for steel, chemicals, vehicles. Employment rises, GDP jumps. But the demand is non-market and fiscal. It neither disciplines cost nor validates product fit. It also crowds out civilian capital and consumption. Living standards stagnate behind pageantry. To hold the system together, governments fix wages and prices, expand directed credit, and lean on foreign clearing arrangements that hide external imbalances until shocks or war strip the cover. The pre-war miracle turns out to be a guns-over-butter mirage. Corporate governance worsens inside the cartel state. With unions neutered and shareholders sidelined by decrees, insiders, managers tied to party networks, dominate. Soft loans, public guarantees, and political bailouts create soft budget constraints. Weak firms persist. Good firms invest to satisfy plan targets rather than future customers. Where conglomerates fuse with the state, think chemical, steel combines, conflicts of interest multiply. The buyer, regulator, and owner share the same phone book. Waste is formalized. Why call this a system that fails? Because its apparent stability requires suppressing the very forces that sustain productivity: entry, exit, and price-guided discovery. It delivers short-run employment by mandating production, not by raising competitiveness. It manages conflict by gagging it, not by aligning incentives. Once the exceptional demand, military or mega-project, ebbs or raw materials tighten, the structure has no engine, only levers. Lessons that travel. Concertation without cartelization. Tripartite talks can coordinate expectations in crises. Don't hand pricing and entry to industry clubs. Strategic autonomy, autarky. Diversify suppliers, build stockpiles, invest in R&D. Don't pour capital into inferior substitutes. Hard budgets, even for champions. If a national champion cannot win without protected demand, fix the firm or let it shrink. Transparency beats pageantry. Publish cost and quality metrics. Keep independent statistics. Don't let parades substitute for audits. Fascist corporatism promised harmony and strength. It delivered politicized cartels, mispriced self-sufficiency, and a prosperity propped up by orders that couldn't compound. Markets are noisy and conflictual. The cure is better rules, not muzzles. Chapter 9. Import Substitution Industrialization. Walls that shrunk the market. The sales pitch was irresistible to post-colonial planners. Stop importing fancy manufactures, protect home producers until they grow up, and keep precious foreign exchange for machines, not perfumes. Import substitution industrialization built tariff walls, quotas, and licensing regimes, rationed dollars with exchange controls, and steered credit to strategic sectors behind the wall. Early results looked good. Assembly plants opened, GDP ticked up, and balance of payments crises paused as imports fell. Then, the arithmetic of scale and learning arrived. ISI's core error is confusing starting industries with competitive ones. Small home markets, split by product licensing and state monopolies, rarely deliver the volumes that make costs drop. Without export pressure, firms face soft competition. They sell everything they can make at protected prices, so they optimize for access, permits, licenses, cheap official dollars, not for process. Inputs stay expensive because upstream sectors are also protected. Quality lags because customers can't walk across a tariff wall. And innovation stalls because survival doesn't require it. Macro policy often amplified the trap. To make imported capital goods cheap, governments overvalued the currency, taxing agriculture and future exporters. Exchange controls and multiple rates created arbitrage racks. Those with licenses bought cheap dollars to import kits and sold finished goods dear. Current account pressure returned as protected industries demanded ever more intermediate imports. Debt filled the gap. Oil shocks and rising rates in the 1970s detonated the bill. The Latin American arc is textbook. Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina built car plants, chemicals, and steel behind high walls. A real industrial base formed, but exports lagged, productivity gaps widened, a 1980s debt crisis forced wrenching adjustments. India's license Raj combined high tariffs with investment permissions and public monopolies. It created islands of capability, space, heavy industry, inside a sea of small, high-cost firms, then pivoted only after the 1991 balance of payments crisis. Ghana and Nigeria tried ISI with overvalued pegs funded by commodity booms. When prices fell, factories that never learned world prices shut overnight. It's not that infant industry protection is always a mistake. East Asia used it differently, narrow, time-bound, tied to export performance, with brutal domestic rivalry. Firms only kept support if they could sell abroad at world price. Failure exited. Logistics, education, and finance were treated as public goods. Exchange rates stayed competitive to force firms onto global learning curves. Where ISI sheltered, they tested. 4 structural failures recur in classic ISI. 1. No export test. Without foreign buyers, cost discipline and product feedback never bite. Scale stays too small for learning. 2. Cascade protection. Shielding every upstream sector raises input costs. Final goods become uncompetitive even at home. 3. Overvalued currency. Cheap capital goods today sabotage tradables tomorrow. Agriculture and nascent exporters pay. 4. Permanent infants. Licenses, quotas, and state credit create constituencies that lobby to avoid graduation. What works instead is not laissez-faire. It's performance-conditioned openness. Use temporary declining tariffs with sunset clauses. Require export targets or cost benchmarks. No meat, no keep. Keep the real exchange rate competitive. Let it move when shocks hit. Subsidize public goods, ports, power, skills, standards, testing labs, not forever margins. Open inputs early, 0 tariffs on machinery and intermediates, so downstream can reach world cost and quality. Make entry and exit easy. Pair support with bankruptcy and antitrust so the worst firms die in the best scale. Measure relentlessly. Publish unit costs, defect rates, delivery times. Reward spillovers, not political ties. ISI delivered dignity, flags on factories, and some capabilities. It failed as a system because walls that protect also shrink the market, and markets that shrink cannot train firms to win. The way out is not no state, it is a state that buys discipline. Compete at home, prove it abroad, or make room for someone who will. Chapter 10. Resource rent statism, the curse of easy money. Oil gushes, copper booms, royalties flood the treasury, and suddenly the state can fund everything without taxing citizens. Roads, subsidies, showcase projects, security forces, all paid from resource rents. For a while, the macro data glows. Then the classic mechanics bite. Dutch disease, a strong currency that chokes other tradables, volatility, prices swing, revenue whiplashes budgets, and rentier politics. Patronage replaces accountability because voters don't fund the state. Wells do. Start with the exchange rate. Commodity windfalls raise demand for local services and imports, pushing up prices and wages. The currency appreciates. Non-resource exporters lose competitiveness. Factories and farms shrink or never scale. When the boom fades, the skills and firms that might have cushioned the fall are gone. Meanwhile, governments lock in permanent promises, fuel and food subsidies, public payrolls, cheap credit that are easy to grant in up cycles and politically explosive to unwind in down cycles. Institutions bend around the windfall. If the budget comes from wells, rulers need citizens less. They can buy loyalty with jobs and contracts, fund security to repress dissent, and distribute selective favors rather than build neutral capacity. National oil companies become states within the state. Cash boxes and employment bureaus with weak cost discipline, opaque procurement, and political investment mandates. Oversight fades, statistics blur, projects multiply that look grand on television and grim in audits. Volatility multiplies mistakes. Pro-cyclical spending fuels construction manias and real estate bubbles. When prices fall, investment stalls, arrears build, and banks drown in bad loans to state-favored firms. Attempts to smooth the cycle with ad hoc borrowing leave countries over-levered, just as collateral, future royalties is least valuable. The social contract curdles. Citizens expect cheap fuel and jobs. Governments expect docility. Both are disappointed when reality intervenes. The grim roll call is familiar. Nigeria alternated booms and busts while agriculture withered and refineries limped. Venezuela rode 3 oil waves into hyperinflation, import collapse, and institutional implosion. Angola built skylines of debts on the same barrel. Russia blended rents with geopolitical risk, softening discipline in non-energy sectors. Not every resource state fails. Botswana, diamonds, and Norway oil show a different path. But their success measures the rule. Neutral budgets, hard constraints, and radical transparency. Designs that defang the curse share 5 traits. 1. Stabilization savings funds with rules. Save abroad in a sovereign fund. Invest only financial assets. Follow a fiscal rule, e.g. spend long on real returns, not spot revenue. Publish inflows-outflows in real time. Submit to independent audits. 2. Non-resource primary balance targets. Run budgets as if oil was zero. Let only a prudent formula-driven transfer fund spending. This forces ministries to choose and citizens to trade off. 3. Competitive exchange rate and open inputs. Lean against appreciation. Remove import barriers on capital goods and intermediates to help non-resource sectors survive. 4. Hard budgets, even for champions. Give state firms commercial mandates, independent boards, and bankruptcy-credible discipline. Separate owner, policymaker, and regulator. Publish cost per barrel, lifting costs and investment hurdle rates. 5. Tax citizens, modestly but broadly. A small, visible tax buys accountability. If people pay, they demand value. If only wells pay, politics drifts to patronage. Local content and diversification policies can help or harm. Use them surgically. Target capabilities with spillovers, welding, maintenance, logistics, software for operations, require training and technology transfer in contracts, and measure outcomes, certified workers, local suppliers reaching export quality. Don't force assembly of uncompetitive products behind the shield of oil money. That repeats ISI with extra steps. Subsidies are the quiet killer. Fuel below cost drains budgets, rewards the rich who consume more, and discourages efficiency. Replace them with cash transfers to households, time-bound and digitized. Pass through global prices while protecting the poor in money, not in barrels. Announce the rule, stick to it in booms and busts. Finally, treat information as infrastructure. Join EITI-style transparency regimes, publish contracts, require open data on volumes, prices and transfers, and insulate statistics from politics. Rents in the dark buy regimens of waste, rents in the light buy public goods. Resource wealth is not destiny, rules are. Without them, easy money buys a strong currency, weak citizens and brittle firms. With them, the barrel becomes a bond that funds schools, courts, labs and roads, while the rest of the economy learns to live at world prices. The curse is not the resource, it's the decision to replace discipline with a gush. Chapter 11. Hyperinflationary Populism, Printing Press as Policy. The script is familiar. A government promises cheap fuel, rising wages and easy credit. A shock hits, war, drought, commodity slump, taxes underperform, borrowing dries up, and the central bank is ordered to fill the gap. Prices jump, so ministers freeze them. Shelves empty, so inspectors raid. Money loses value, so more is printed to keep up. Within months, people are paid twice a day and sprint to spend before prices change. That is hyperinflation. Not just high inflation, but a feedback loop where money demand collapses, velocity explodes, and the state's own policies accelerate the fire. The mechanics start with fiscal dominance. Seigneurage, the real resources a state gets by creating money, has a peak. As inflation rises, people hold smaller cash balances. The inflation tax base shrinks. Beyond the peak, printing faster yields less real revenue. Governments then print even faster to chase the same purchasing power, and the loop tightens. Meanwhile, expectations are more. Workers and suppliers demand indexation. Firms set prices for where they think costs will be, not where they are. Contracts shorten. The economy rewrites itself at weekly or daily horizons. The exchange rate becomes a megaphone. As trust in the currency fades, demand for foreign money surges. With reserves scarce, authorities impose multiple exchange rates and controls. A parallel market forms, signaling a truer price of the currency. Import costs pass through to domestic prices, capital flees, the official rate loses credibility, and policy loses traction. Price controls convert inflation into shortages. With capped prices and rising costs, output falls, quality deteriorates, and goods migrate to black markets where the state cannot see or tax them. Attempts to repress the symptoms destroy the information that might guide repair. Finance degrades. Real interest rates go deeply negative. Banks become conduits for forced lending to the state. Savings flee to dollars, goods, or land. Tax systems seize up as brackets lag reality, and audits are meaningless at hourly inflation. The state's capacity erodes exactly when it is needed most. Statistics become untrustworthy, procurement corruptible, and ordinary enforcement, payrolls, pensions, utilities, episodic. Socially, hyperinflation is a hard regressor. It punishes fixed incomes, rewards insiders with access to hard currency, and widens the gap between those who can arbitrage and those who cannot. The exit is conceptually simple and politically hard. Turn off the source, supply an anchor, and rebuild trust. 1. Kill fiscal dominance. Balance, or credibly pre-commit to balance, the non-monetary budget. End quasi-fiscal losses in state firms and banks. Raise energy and transport tariffs to cost. Broaden VAT and income tax bases. Scrap generalized subsidies and replace them with targeted cash transfers. Publish a cash plan that shows no money creation for the deficit. 2. Install a nominal anchor. Options vary: currency board, dollarization, a hard peg with capital controls for a time, or a temporarily fixed path for the money base, backed by reserves and a legal Treasury central bank firewall. Redenominate and swap old notes quickly. Unify exchange rates on day one. Let a single market clearing rate transmit reality. If you choose a peg, pair it with rules that force symmetric adjustment, fiscal surpluses when needed, sterilization limits, no soft lending. 3. Break inertia. Temporary incomes pacts, wage and administered price guidelines can help de-index while the anchor's credibility takes hold, only if paired with fiscal repair. Without repair, pacts dissolve into queues and repression. Remove price controls rapidly, but stage utility and fuel price resets with compensating transfers. 4. Rebuild institutions. Grant operational independence to the central bank with a narrow price stability mandate. Ban primary deficit financing. Publish high-frequency monetary and fiscal data. Protect the statistics agency. Clean up bank balance sheets. Recapitalize or resolve insolvent lenders. Reopen term funding at positive real rates. 5. Communicate and sequence. Announce the package as a single plan with dates, numbers, and verification. Partial measures fail because agents hedge. Credibility is an input, front-load visible, hard-to-reverse moves, legal firewalls, fund capitalization, subsidy reform, so private forecasts pivot early. Case histories differ in costume but not in plot. Weimar's reparations and Ruhr's shock, Yugoslavia's collapsing federation, Zimbabwe's land seizures and collapsing supply, Venezuela's price controls plus fiscal holes all married deficits to the press, smothered prices, fractured FX markets, and lost the map. Where stabilization worked, think orthodox plans that combined fiscal correction with a credible anchor, output rebounded quickly once money regained its function. Where governments tried to freeze prices and print just until growth returns, the spiral resumed meaner than before. The durable lessons fit on one card. Money is a veil until you tear it. Don't finance promises at the press. Tax and borrow on budget transparently. Use prices to carry information, not to carry politics. If crisis comes, move fast and whole. Fix the budget, pick an anchor, protect the poor with cash, and publish everything. Hyperinflation is not bad weather. It is engineered. That makes it frightening and fixable. Chapter 12. Shock Therapy Without Institutions. Freedom to Fail Fast. The idea sounded clean. Rip off the bandage. Free prices, open trade, privatize state firms, float the currency, and let markets reallocate overnight. In theory, a big bang avoids the limbo where old lobbies sabotage reform. In practice, when institutions are missing, property rights, honest courts, competition policy, bankruptcy law, bank supervision, social insurance, shock therapy becomes freedom to strip, not freedom to reallocate. Start with price liberalization. If you free prices before you free entry, the incumbents you just deregulated still own the only refineries, rail lines, or wholesale depots. They raise prices, restrict output, and convert relational power into cash. Without antitrust, access rules, and independent regulators, market prices become monopoly prices. Consumers face inflation that isn't a macro program so much as the bill for old monopolies now charging what the traffic will bear. Add privatization without rule of law. Vouchers, insider sales, loans for shares, they all promise to turn nobody's property into somebody's. But if courts can't enforce contracts, registries are corruptible, minority shareholders lack protection, and bankruptcy has no teeth, the somebodies who win are those best at political extraction. Assets are tunneled, profits upstreamed, liabilities left behind. Investment falls, capital flight rises, the public sees reform as theft. When legitimacy goes, so does compliance with taxes and regulation, and the state's capacity shrinks precisely when it needs to grow. Then macro. Liberalize the capital account before cleaning up banks, and you get outflows at the first hint of trouble. Float the currency without credible fiscal anchors, and depreciation passes through to prices while wages chase, eroding real balances and trust. Kill subsidies overnight without a targeted cash cushion, and you generate arrears and barter. Price signals can't coordinate when firms pay in goods and workers are paid in kind. The monetarist arithmetic works only if the fiscal side closes. If it doesn't, money substituting for missing revenue turns stabilization into another shock. The labor market magnifies pain. If you legalize layoffs before you build unemployment insurance, retraining, and job-matching services, reforms look like a one-way door to joblessness. Skilled workers exit, informality expands, and politics radicalizes. A credible social floor isn't charity, it's infrastructure for structural change. It buys time for reallocation and preserves political consent. Sequencing is the through line. Successful big moves bundle complements, price freedom with entry freedom, privatization with competition law and disclosure, bank liberalization with supervision, resolution tools and deposit insurance, trade opening with customs modernization and standards agencies, subsidy reform with cash transfers and debt workouts for utilities. Miss the complements and you get selection on predation, not productivity. Why did some partial shocks work? Because the state capacity varied. Where tax systems were modernized early, where independent central banks had political backing, where bankruptcy courts functioned, and where securities laws protected small investors, privatized firms could raise real capital and be disciplined by takeover threats and delisting. Where those pieces were absent, wealth concentrated in insiders, investment collapsed, and the median voter equated markets with plunder. The lesson is not go slow, it's go complete. Speed helps only when the scaffold is in place. Anchor the budget first, end quasi-fiscal losses, state banks, utilities, broaden the tax base and firewall the central bank. Nominal anchors, disinflation paths, pegs work only with a fiscal spine. Unblock entry on day one. One-stop registration, transparent licensing, open access to networks, rail slots pipelines on fair terms. Privatize with guardrails, audited accounts pre-sale, clear owner of record, minority protections, mandatory disclosure, competitive auctions. No insider debts for equity that leave zombies standing. Enforce competition, merger control, cartel enforcement, interim measures against dominance, sector regulators with tariff and access powers. Harden budgets, credible bankruptcy that bites, special administration for systemic firms, and public banks put under fit and proper boards, or resolved. Protect the floor, time-limited, means-tested cash, wage insurance for displaced workers, active labor programs tied to real vacancies, meter and compensate utility price resets. Communication matters. Reform fails politically when losers are immediate and visible, while gains are diffuse and delayed. Publish metrics that move, queue times falling, connections granted, cost to start a business, on-time freight, court clearance rates, and tie minister pay to them. Use sunset clauses and milestones so beneficiaries of transitional support know the bridge has an end. Above all, separate pace from preconditions. If you don't yet have courts that can enforce a share registry, that run voucher privatization that creates a cartel of paper owners, start with commercialization, hard contracts, and minority stakes tied to disclosure. If your bank supervisors can't stop related party lending, don't open the capital account. Focus on cleaning balance sheets, then liberalize. Shock therapy's promise was to break coalitions that profit from stalemate. Its failure mode is to empower a new coalition that profits from chaos. Markets are not just prices, they are rights, rivalry, and remedies. Build those, and speed is a friend. Skip them, and speed just makes the crash arrive sooner.